During a high school or college tennis match, a coach's attention is usually spread across 6 tennis courts, where 6 matches are being played by players who are displaying an array of emotions. Because it's impossible to watch every point played, the attention of the coaches may be drawn to matches that are highly emotional, especially if the emotional displays of the players appear to indicate that the player might be in danger of falling apart mentally. At most levels, tennis coaches are allowed to walk onto the court for about 90 seconds to talk with their player during changeovers, which occur after every odd game. Sometimes the conversations may focus on strategy, but other times the coach is just trying to help their player regulate their emotions, so that they don't crumble under the pressure of a particularly tense moment in the match. At the higher levels of athletic competition, everyone has the physical skill set to compete. So it's usually psychological factors or mental toughness that separate the good from the great. So in tennis, it may not be the player that has the biggest serve or the most accurate backhand, but the player who is best able to regulate their emotions during the competition that emerges victorious. So if emotion regulation is such a big deal, it's important that we really understand emotion and emotion regulation. Within seconds of emerging from the womb, newborns tend to cry, an obvious indication of negative emotion. But shortly after birth, newborns also demonstrate interest in their environment and seem to indicate some form of contentment when they get things they need, like food and physical contact. Babies are born pre-programmed to feel, but the emotions of newborns aren't very sophisticated. It's just sort of a positive or negative thing. They feel bad or they feel good. However, during the first couple months of life, the so-called basic emotions emerge, allowing infants to display a wider array of feelings. Between 6 and 10 weeks, infants begin to display social smiles in response to faces or face-like shapes. And by 3 months of age, infants are able to differentiate between smiley faces and faces of actual people. Between 3 and 6 months, babies start to display big smiles in response to familiar events or people smiling at them. And between 6 and 7 months, babies get a little more discerning, smiling at familiar people, but sometimes showing a fearful reaction to strangers. The negative emotions of anger and sadness become differentiated around 2 months of age, when babies show angry responses to a loss of control, and shortly thereafter show sadness in response to pain or an unresponsive caregiver. So for most babies, anger and sadness are clearly distinct emotions that are associated with recognizable sounds and facial expressions around 4 months of age. But babies don't typically show characteristics of fear until months 6 or 7, but during months 7 or 8, fear of strangers and separation anxiety is clear. Stranger anxiety and separation anxiety peak around 14 to 18 months, where these little ones are wary of unfamiliar faces, seek proximity to their primary attachment figure when they experience fear, and show distress in response to separation from their primary attachment figure. So notice during these first few months, the baby's ability to experience and display emotions is made possible as the baby develops greater visual acuity and memory for faces and experiences. Most human emotions can be placed in one of 4 basic categories: anger, sadness, joy, and fear, or mad, glad, sad, and scared. And these 4 emotions, along with disgust, love, and surprise, provide a fairly comprehensive summary of a human organism's emotional world during their first 18 months of life. But during the second half of the second year, something happens that makes it possible for children to experience a much wider array of emotions. They develop self-awareness. The test used to determine whether a child has developed self-awareness is one of the most clever in child development's bag of tricks. And it's called the Rouge Test, and it works like this. The mother has their baby sit in their lap facing a mirror. And the mother then distracts the baby from the mirror and covertly brushes the tip of their child's nose with rouge or blush. Before a child becomes aware of their own existence, when they turn around again and look at the mirror, they will reach out toward the mirror to try and touch the red-nosed infant looking at them. But once a child has gained self-awareness, they'll touch their own nose. And once a child is aware of their own existence, they're able to experience self-conscious emotions. They start to experience embarrassment when they feel that they've messed up, and envy when another child has something that they wish they had, and empathy when they see someone else in distress. And each of these self-conscious emotions are associated with characteristic behaviors. For example, when children are embarrassed, they will avoid eye contact, smile awkwardly, and engage in nervous touching. And at some point during the terrible twos, a child gains an understanding of the rules and standards that they're expected to obey in their society. And this gives rise to the self-conscious evaluative emotions, like pride, shame, guilt, and regret. When children feel that they have attained or exceeded some standard, they experience pride. When they feel that they've failed or let someone down, they may feel shame or guilt or regret. Notice that pride is different than joy or happiness because pride requires that we feel that we have accomplished something. And a feeling of shame is different than sadness because shame requires that we hold ourselves responsible for something. So by the time a child turns 3, they're able to experience a wide array of emotions, dozens of which could be identified during a half-hour tennis camp for 3 and 4-year-olds. Joy as the preschoolers climb out of the minivan and see their teacher. Fear as the new kid is peeled off his mother's leg and sent out onto the tennis court. Disappointment as the kid realizes that someone has taken his favorite racket. And pride as the little girl hits what she feels is a perfect volley. But at a tennis camp for 3 and 4-year-olds, we also see signs of emotion regulation or lack thereof in many children, which reminds us that emotion regulation skills develop on a different timeline than the emotions themselves. When a 6-month-old is overly stimulated, they will try and reduce distress by sucking on their thumb or a pacifier, or by turning away from what is bothering them. By the way, infant girls are a little better than infant boys in doing this. And at this age, parents will often help their babies regulate their negative emotions by saying, it's okay, or But they tend not to try and help their babies regulate their positive emotions, like, whoa there, pace yourself, that's quite enough smiling for today. So by 12 months, infants have developed new strategies like rocking or crawling away from a particular stressor. By 18 to 24 months, toddlers will attempt to control the behavior of others to regulate their own emotions. So for example, at this age, my niece Kaylee liked it when I played guitar sometimes, but when she had enough, she would say, no guitar, or place her hand across the guitar string so it wouldn't make a sound. By age 3, children start to show some ability to mask their emotions. For example, by pretending to be happy when they actually feel disappointed. And during the grade school years, children become increasingly better at masking their emotions and obeying emotional display rules, or culturally defined norms that specify which emotion should or should not be expressed in certain circumstances. Like appearing appreciative when they get a gift that they don't particularly like. But emotion regulation is an important life skill for reasons in addition to not offending grandparents. Emotional competence is a prerequisite for social competence. For example, by being able to express appropriate positive emotions in social interactions, and the ability to regulate negative emotions like anger or sadness in social settings. If you think about it, most of the humor in Napoleon Dynamite was based on the fact that the main characters were really socially incompetent. And Napoleon was particularly awkward and emotionally incompetent, getting unreasonably upset when someone would request one of his tots or lack prior knowledge of his favorite animal. But in addition to helping us navigate our social worlds, our ability to regulate our emotions can be critically important to our ability to perform in a variety of domains. And our capacity to experience emotion and to regulate these emotions provides an important foundation for understanding the psychology of sport performance. Like a newborn's world, our understanding of the role of emotion in sport performance starts with the simple reality that sometimes we feel good and sometimes we feel bad. And when performing a task, we tend to feel better when we have succeeded, and we tend to feel worse when we have failed. To see how emotions change in response to perceived success and failure throughout a performance, let's start at a neutral starting point where a basketball player's affect is flat. She is not feeling particularly good or bad, just sort of even keel. If she starts off the game by making a layup, she may feel content or happy or experience a burst of pride. Success feels good. And she enters the pleased competitive position on the performance dial. When we succeed, the probability that we will succeed again increases for a number of reasons. First, when we are experiencing positive emotions, we recall and process information more quickly. Second, we tend to make better decisions because positive emotion is associated with more flexible thinking, allowing us to switch attention among multiple aspects of a situation, which is obviously important for sport performance. And third, positive emotion increases motivation in tasks where the performer believes that their effort will make a difference. And when the basketball player makes a layup, her confidence that she can do it again increases. So in the pleased competitive position, the basketball player's confidence and motivation has increased, and her focus is concentrated on the game, and joy is the predominating emotion. As a player makes a series of successful passes and makes a few jump shots, joy turns to excitement as she enters the energized competitive position. And as an athlete's successes accumulate, their confidence increases along with their motivation, and their focus is not distracted by past mistakes or future outcomes. And this may be because after each successful pass or steal or block shot, the player gets a little burst of dopamine, which activates areas in the frontal lobe associated with higher level capacities like problem solving and decision making. And the dopamine hypothesis also provides insight into the reasons why runners will sometimes describe feeling a little burst of energy every time they pass a runner. Occasionally, everything seems to come together and the athlete dials in and enters a euphoric state in which they are so confident that they can't fail, so motivated that there's nothing they would rather be doing, and so focused on the task at hand that no sight or sound could possibly distract them. Call it in the zone or flow if you like. This experience doesn't happen very often, even for elite athletes, but when it does, the predominating emotion is something like love, deep satisfaction, and total devotion to the experience. It's an emotional experience so profound that poets may be better equipped than scientists to describe it. An experience of giving up conscious control and just letting things happen. Now let's return to the neutral starting position on the performance dial. If instead of making a layup, the basketball player misses a three-point shot, she will likely feel somewhat angry or frustrated. But if she were to miss an open layup, the predominating emotion might be something more like embarrassment or shame. When we fail, we tend to feel bad and usually enter the frustrated competitive position. And negative emotions occasion negative thinking. Confidence and motivation decrease as the athlete's focus begins to vacillate between past mistakes and future consequences rather than the present. So the predominating emotion in the frustrated competitive position is anger, albeit a relatively mild form of anger. Anger can be facilitative or debilitating in sport performance. facilitative for some tasks like powerlifting or rushing the quarterback, because anger can activate the autonomic nervous system, thereby temporarily increasing motivation and work output. Anger can help us overcome some obstacles, but anger can also lead to erratic thinking and really bad decision making, thereby increasing the chances a basketball player could commit a stupid foul because her focus shifted from scoring a basket to seeking revenge against an opponent. So by the way, there is a lot of truth in a lyric from the Fixer Upper song in Disney's Frozen, that people do make bad choices when they're mad or scared or stressed. When an athlete gets frustrated enough and they make an additional mistake, they tend to enter the preoccupied competitive position, where they are angry with themselves for making mistakes, confused as to why the mistakes have been made, and scared of making additional mistakes. The preoccupied competitive position is the most obviously emotional of the competitive positions, where the athlete may rapidly vacillate between anger and embarrassment and confusion and shame. But when fear becomes an athlete's predominating emotion, they are in danger of falling apart completely. You see, anger is an approach motivation associated with our desire to succeed, but fear is an avoidance emotion which causes us to try not to fail. And when our motivation is to not fail, our focus shifts to failure. So if a basketball player steps up to the line thinking, okay, just don't shoot an air ball like last time, her words will direct her to not shoot an air ball, but her behavior will more likely follow her attention, picturing an air ball hitting the net, rather than her intention, her desire to not miss badly. This phenomenon, called ironic processing, explains why we sometimes do exactly what we're trying not to do, and helps explain why the predominating emotion of fear increases the probability that an athlete who is deep in the preoccupied competitive position is most likely to make additional mistakes or to choke under pressure. To be clear, the depths of the preoccupied position are an intensely negative emotional experience. And just as an infant will look away from a stressor and a 12-month-old will crawl away from something distressing, even the most elite athletes can reach a point at which they will give up hope and dial out so that they can escape from the intense distress of a competition that is not going well. And notice that the athlete was able to reach this point of no return because they lacked the emotion regulation skills to deal with their perceptions of prior failure. This is one way of thinking about mental toughness. When an athlete dials out, they may do so by physically leaving the field or court or rink in a sport where substitutions are allowed, but in a sport like track and field, they may just stop trying and just finish the race. And in a sport like tennis, there's actually a name for the act of continuing to play when you've thrown in the towel mentally. It's called tanking. When a tennis player tanks, they usually start to take overly aggressive shots or let drop balls bounce a second time or let passing shots beat them without putting up much of a fight. So in the dialed out competitive position, motivation to succeed is almost non-existent because the motivation to get out of the stressful situation takes precedence. But the dialed out competitive position is actually a less intense emotional experience than the preoccupied competitive position. Because while the predominating emotion is sadness, their disappointment is mixed with relief that the end is near. For the sake of clarity, I've described the emotional experience of a basketball player whose game started off well and the emotional changes as things continued to get better, and the basketball player who made an initial mistake before things spiraled out of control. But in reality, an athlete's emotions are constantly changing throughout an athletic performance, sometimes minute by minute or even second by second. Unfortunately, a lot of sports psychology research on emotion and sport performance was based on the false premise that an athlete's emotional state remains basically the same throughout a competition. So with that in mind, researchers would distribute questionnaires to athletes an hour or two prior to a competition and attempt to correlate their responses with their performance in the competition. To make matters worse, some researchers really got fixated on a single emotion, anxiety, to the exclusion of other emotions that predominate in some competitive situations. Athletic competition involves varied emotions that are constantly changing throughout a competition, and in most cases, athletes spend most of their time in the frustrated and pleased competitive positions. Due to the back and forth nature of sport, where successes are mixed with failures. Because, for example, tennis players rarely win all of the points or lose all of the points in a set. It's kind of remarkable how as humans we can have such rich emotional experiences. And our most profound experiences in life are profoundly emotional. Getting your driver's license, going to prom, graduating, getting married, having children, having grandchildren. They wouldn't be the same without arousing strong emotions. And as humans, we're really good at detecting emotions in others based on tiny changes in our eyes or our complexions. But we sometimes lack the ability to regulate our own emotions during bad experiences. And our ability to regulate our emotions or our inability to regulate our emotions can have a profound influence on our likelihood of success on and off the court. And that is yet another reason why coaches can be so influential. In addition to helping their players learn to regulate their emotions during crunch time on the court, these emotion regulation skills will transfer to other domains that may be more consequential than a basketball game or a tennis match.